Could you make it through the night in England's most haunted castle without running for the exit? Chillingham Castle isn't just old, it's a real house of horrors. For centuries, this place was right in the middle of bloody battles, unimaginable cruelty, and even massacres. Today, the ghost stories aren't just stories. They're a glimpse into a past so dark that many say Chillingham is the most haunted castle in the country. Some spirits are friendly, if a little unnerving, but others, let's just say people don't always hang around until morning. Okay, so with stories of anywhere between 50 to 100 separate entities haunting the place, what on earth made Chillingham Castle seemingly infested with ghosts? And I mean, you only need to look at the history of the place to start getting an inkling as to why. So back in the 1100s, it was said that there was a monastery on the site. Some sources claim that it was there way back in the 900s too, but we don't truly know. Either way, it ended up in the hands of the Grey family in 1246. Whether the crown granted it to them or they took it for themselves. Again, no official record that we know of. Which is just the story of anything to do with medieval drama though, like, let's be honest. But the Grey family would make Chillingham their home for the next 800 years, starting off with enjoying a lovely manor house. But the thing was, where the castle sits, way up in Northumberland, about 30 minutes-ish from the Scottish border, that was a super strategic point, at a super turbulent time in the country where the English and the Scottish were at war with each other. In 1296, the Greys would soon find out when a Scottish raid completely destroyed the original manor house. At that point, a new house was built, a much more fortified structure this time. It's thought that this original structure became one of the towers that still stands today. It had walls 12 feet thick in some places, and it was all surrounded by a moat, like a proper job. Things weren't slowing down with the war for Scottish independence though, and so Chillingham became the ultimate medieval stronghold. English armies that were marching north into Scotland could use it as a staging post, somewhere to stop off and make sure that they were ready for battle. But then also, because of its importance, it had a big old target on its back, being repeatedly attacked and besieged by Scottish forces and raiding parties heading down south. In 1297, William Wallace himself, Guardian of Scotland, military leader, and portrayed by Mel Gibson in that oh so historically accurate Braveheart, it's not accurate. He led a brutal raid down in the area, and so in retaliation, English forces stationed at Chillingham just went full-on revenge. Anyone they suspected of helping the Scots was dragged behind those walls, and during that time, that irony, metallic smell of blood, the sound of desperate screams, they would have been constant, day and night, around the clock at the castle. Guilt or innocence didn't really matter. Scottish prisoners were locked away, interrogated, and subjected to unimaginable pain and suffering. Most who entered never walked back out. Because at this time in its bloody history, Chillingham Castle wasn't just the fortress used to demonstrate the English strength. It was a killing machine, with thousands suffering and dying. To the point where if you set foot in Chillingham as a Scot during those years, odds were you weren't going to make it out alive. You just can't even imagine what it would have been like, can you? If you're captured by the English and you find yourself in the torture chamber of Chillingham Castle, knowing that the only thing waiting for you was just misery before death finally took you. That is just barbaric to think about. And so with all of that trauma, you already know that that is going to leave behind more than just energy. But a few of the ghosts still roaming the halls aren't just the victims of this brutality. At least one of them was said to be the guy holding the keys, running the torture chamber himself. But that's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves for now. The year after William Wallace's raid, so in 1298, King Edward I, the infamously nicknamed Hammer of the Scots, he turned up to stay at Chillingham ahead of facing off with William Wallace at the Battle of Falkirk. King Edward had his own room, as befitting the King of England, but you can just imagine the buzz of energy and life in the castle ahead of that battle. Soldiers everywhere, sharpening weapons, sorting the horses, castle staff running about, with everyone just on edge, like anxious about what was to come. And while the English went on to win this battle, and William Wallace resigned officially from his position, he was still the embodiment of Scottish resistance, and the war was far from over. In 1344, Sir Thomas Grey, the head of the household, he got his license to crenellate. Because in case you didn't know, you can't just decide one day to build yourself a castle. You could have a fortified manor house, sure, but a full-on castle, you needed the green light from the king. And it was at this point that the 3 extra towers were built and a curtain wall put up all around them. And of course, no castle is complete without a proper torture chamber and a dungeon with an oubliette, right? Oh yeah, today's story is going to be getting dark. These facilities were in regular use in the castle because the need for information about the enemy was never ending. The English wanted to know what the Scots' next move was, where they were camped, how many men did they have, like what sort of firepower, all of this sort of thing. The Greys of Chillingham were right there during the Battle of Flodden Field, where English forces absolutely crushed the Scottish army, being led by King James VI. And he was fighting on the Scottish side. This was before he became the English king as well. But that violence did come home too to Chillingham during the Pilgrimage of Grace, a full-blown Catholic rebellion against Henry VIII in 1536, where the castle came under siege by Sir Thomas Percy of Alnwick. But by the 17th century, Chillingham's days of constant warfare and just generally being a place where you wouldn't want to find yourself imprisoned, that was all starting to kind of come to an end. England and Scotland joined forces in 1603, when King James VI of Scotland also became King James I of England. And after that, the castle just wasn't needed as a fortress anymore. Instead, it stepped more into its role as a stately home, hosting King James on his way down to claim the English crown. Even into the English Civil War, King Charles I stopped off here, although clearly we all know how that went. And if you don't, it ended with him losing the crown and his head. By the 18th and 19th centuries though, things had really started to calm down, until we get to World War II. Apparently the Grey family, although they were also then known as the Bennets through marriage, and they also had the earldom of Tankerville, they'd already moved out of the castle in 1933 due to financial difficulties. And so the army took over the castle, as they did for a lot of country houses and things up and down the country, for the soldiers to move in. And they weren't exactly careful with the antiques. They ripped out the wood panelling for firewood, absolutely trashed the inside, and turned the place into probably what my student halls look like at the end of Freshers Week. Just rough. Although, I went to an agricultural university, so I wonder whether they would also pluck the pheasants that they'd shot, and then leave the bits that they didn't want in the communal bins over the weekend. Yeah, that is a thing that happened in my block. But then, after the Second World War, the place was just neglected. It was still owned by the family, but they never wanted to move back in after the war, and so the condition of the place just got worse and worse. Thieves stripped the lead off the roof, so then water got in and caused the floors and the ceilings to collapse. Like, it was just a mess. By 1948, the castle was completely abandoned and basically just crumbling. When the 9th Earl of Tankerville, Charles Augustus Grey Bennet, died in 1980, his son inherited the title, but soon after, the estate was broken up and sold on. But the castle itself, it was still standing, barely. Apparently not even the National Trust or English Heritage, like the two big hitters over here that look after historical sites, neither of those guys wanted it. It was just going to cost too much to get the place right again. And so that seemed to be it for the castle, until a couple of years after that, along came Sir Humphrey Wakefield. He fell in love with the place, but his wife, Lady Wakefield, she was actually a descendant of the Grey family, seeming that things were coming back full circle and the castle was then back in the family. In 1982, he was literally handed the keys to the castle and began a huge project of painstakingly restoring the building to its former glory. And he's done a proper job, like putting the ceilings back up to where they're supposed to be, you know, quite important, refurnishing the rooms, like all of that. And nowadays, the castle is open to the public. You can take a walk around and see what it would have looked like in years gone by. You can walk around the manicured gardens, see where King Edward I stayed before battle, and if you want to, you can even stay the night. They do have a few self-catering apartments that you can stay in. And if you're so inclined, which you're watching this video, so I'm guessing you are, you can take a look at the type of instruments that would have been used to interrogate Scottish prisoners, all set up in a makeshift torture chamber in the undercroft of the castle. Oh yeah, it doesn't shy away from that at all, which I'm all for. Fair play. It was a part of the castle's history. It was gruesome, it was horrific, but it happened. Like, acknowledge it, you know? Although this exhibition room isn't in the actual torture chamber. That was sealed off, and there is a reason for that. Possibly supernatural, as some people like to believe. Basically, if you visit the castle nowadays, you can have a nice, informative day out, walking around the place, and then if you're anything like me, you'll stop off at the tea rooms, because my whole life revolves around food. But if you didn't know, you might completely breeze past the fact that there are multiple fireplaces in this room. Not unusual. Big rooms like that, they would have multiple fireplaces, especially as that room in particular used to be the kitchens way back in the day. So it's whatever, right? But actually, there's one fireplace that has its own overmantel, a stone carving that depicts a scene from the Old Testament, Susanna and the Elders. And bear with me, I'm not just going off on a random on tangent here. The gist of this story being depicted is about uncovering the truth despite what's in front of you. A gross oversimplification being don't trust initial appearances because they aren't quite what they seem. There's a bit more to it than that, but for the purposes of this video, that's it. And the reason I'm telling you this is because it's kind of like an Easter egg if you know what you're looking for. Because this fireplace in particular was built around the Victorian times and is actually blocking off the only entrance and exit to the original torture chamber that sits hidden away underneath the tea rooms. Yep, you're sipping on your refreshments while underneath your feet is the room where unspeakable horrors happened to Scottish prisoners. When Sir Humphrey took on the castle in the 80s and got to looking around, seeing what he could open up for the public to enjoy, he went through the little doorway that exists in the back of the fireplace and actually went down into the torture chamber to have a look around. The next bit is a little bit of a legend really, and depends on how you want to take it. But apparently when Sir Humphrey came back up into the tea rooms, he didn't say much, but he did say that we need to, quote, leave this place alone. So wildly up to interpretation, that statement. Does it mean that it's structurally unsafe, not going to be able to handle the traffic in and out of there through that one little doorway? Does it mean that it's the site of atrocities, like people mutilated and murdered, and so it should just be left alone in peace? Or, and this is something that got talked about a lot online, did something happen to him down there? Did he have some sort of paranormal experience that made him feel like it just wouldn't be safe to open up to the public? Some say there was a seance held down there, but it, quote, went wrong. But who knows? Sir Humphrey himself, he 100% believes in the paranormal though. He knows for a fact that Chillingham Castle is haunted, although he has the mindset of, he knows they're there, they know he's there, let's all just get along. Even his dog seems to be able to pick up on the energy there, as he'll act all friendly, like wagging his tail at something that no one else can see, and then other times he'll start growling at empty space. So that's fun. Although Sir Humphrey did once bring in a priest who was supposedly an expert at banishing ghosts, but the priest took one look around and said that the place was so packed with spirits that there wasn't a great deal that he could do, and that was that. He left. They're great. Cheers, mate. The reason that Sir Humphrey had called him in the first place though was because while he was on a business trip to America, he met with a soothsayer who told him that his heart was back in a haunted house at home, which, yes, he was living in Chillingham Castle at the time. I'd say that's a pretty haunted house to live in. But also she told him that it's not a good place for his youngest son Jack, which for context he took to mean that Jack was his son from his third marriage, the Grey family line, his current wife. And so maybe the ghosts haunting the place recognised that as another Grey family member coming back here after all they did to the Scottish prisoners centuries ago. Just something to think about. But if you want to see if you can experience the paranormal goings on for yourself, you can book onto one of the regular ghost tours they run, or even join a proper ghost hunt. It's extremely popular with paranormal investigators and people interested in the paranormal, because a lot of people do call it the most haunted castle in Britain. It's not hard to see how people come to that conclusion though, based on its super dark history and the fact that human remains are still being found on the grounds. They've been found everywhere too, in the walls, under the floors, even on the drive up to the castle. Some historians say that around 7,500 prisoners were killed at the castle, and that is a lot of death. So you can imagine the scale of ghost stories that I've got to tell you about. Settle in, we are gonna be here for a while. And we've got the lovely Lady Leonora Tankerville to thank for recording a lot of the castle's ghost stories. She moved into the castle from the States in 1895 after marrying the Earl of Tankerville, but she literally wrote the book on these hauntings, publishing The Ghost of Chillingham Castle in 1925. So it was very interesting to see what ghost stories were already hanging around by that point, and even more interestingly, what ghost stories were here when the castle wasn't making an income from the paranormal yet. But the booklet she wrote also includes her own paranormal experiences she had before and during her time at Chillingham Castle. Because before she ever even lived at Chillingham, Leonora had this vision that she was walking around a castle that she'd never seen, never even heard described, just wandering around the grounds. Suddenly, a man that she didn't recognise appeared beside her and said, "I'm here to walk with you until my brother George is ready." Okay. A little while later, as they carried on walking, she bumped into this George, the man who she would go on to marry and who would be the next Earl of Tankerville. He was also just chilling in this vision. At that point though, she barely knew him in real life. They'd only met once before, there were no wedding bells or anything just yet, but as soon as he appeared, the mysterious man just vanished. Life moved on. Leonora did actually get married to George, the new Earl of Tankerville, and so she moved into Chillingham Castle. But someone showed her a photo of George's brother, a man who had died 2 years before Leonora's vision. And so that's when everything all clicks into place. The ghost in her vision had been her future brother-in-law. So that was pretty interesting. thing. But then her ghost stories carried on once she was the Lady of Chillingham Castle. And this one just sounds so much like a classic crisis apparition. Not so much to do with the castle itself. It was just after midnight one night and Lady Leonora was just brushing her hair, winding down for bed. And at that time, her thoughts just kind of turned to a friend of theirs. There was a young officer that she and her husband knew, but he'd been seriously ill at that time and it wasn't really looking too good. They weren't expecting the worst just yet, but it was a bit of a scary time. Suddenly, out of nowhere, while she was standing at the dressing table alone, she was hit with this overwhelming sense that there was someone standing right there next to her. She could feel there was a man right there staring at her, scrutinizing her, like he was just about to say something. And she was so freaked out by whatever was going on that her first instinct was to grab her dressing gown and cover up, as if there was a real life person in the room with her. But there was no one there. And as quickly as that feeling consumed her, it was gone again. She frantically looked around the room to double check. Yep, there was no one else there with her. But she just can't help herself. She has a feeling. And so she goes to tell the Earl, her husband, that it's happened. Our friend, the officer, he's gone. He's dead. The next day, the news arrived that, yep, the officer passed away just after midnight, exactly when Leonora felt that overwhelming sense that she wasn't alone. But one of Leonora's strangest experiences happened out in the gardens of Chillingham Castle. She was just out there, again, minding her own business, when suddenly, it was almost like someone had changed the frequency in her brain, and she started seeing a whole different scene play out in front of her, almost like it was superimposed on the real world. She described seeing what she thought was a Dominican abbess, a head nun. Although technically Dominicans don't have abbesses, but you get the idea. This abbess was down on her knees in prayer, but clearly stressed and staring off towards the Scottish hills. In the distance, Leonora could hear the sound of cannon fire, so very quickly it was clear that there was a battle or some sort of conflict happening very close by. Standing near to the abbess was a man who was keeping watch on the horizon, but when Leonora looked closer, she could tell that this man unmistakably had her husband, the Earl of Tankerville's face. But he was dressed in clothes from centuries ago. But from that, Leonora got the sense that somehow she was supposed to be the abbess and her husband was there standing over her. But in that particular moment, she had no idea what any of it was supposed to mean. A little while later though, World War I kicked off. Coincidence? Entirely possible, but with Leonora's history of visions and things, it does get lumped in with the strange goings on at Chillingham. But the booklet that Leonora wrote also spoke about Chillingham's most famous haunting, the Radiant Boy, or sometimes called the Blue Boy. His legend comes from the castle's pink room in the northwest tower, but you can't actually get to it if you're a commoner like the rest of us. With good reason really, it's part of the owner's private apartments, so yeah, you can't really go traipsing through someone else's house. But conveniently enough, it all just adds to the mystery, doesn't it? For years though, people swore that at midnight they'd be woken up to the sounds of a child crying desperately, and that sound seemed to be coming from the walls. As the noise faded, a bright blue light would flash and the figure of a young boy, with his face and clothes glowing blue, would step out into the room towards the terrified witnesses. Apparently, during the 1920s though, workmen were in the pink room and they broke through the wall into a hidden chamber. Like something straight out of a gothic novel, they found the skeleton of a young kid, wrapped in scraps of blue cloth, and he'd been sealed up inside the wall, alive. And the reason that they knew that was apparently the bones of the young boy's fingertips all had marks on, where he'd worn down his fingers to the bone, scratching to get out. The legend goes on to say that the boy was carrying secret documents relating to the Spanish Armada, leading some people to believe that he was a spy. Or maybe he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time and he was walled up inside Chillingham Castle to do away with that particular problem. Either way, his remains were taken out of the wall and given a proper burial in the local churchyard, and for a while, the crying stopped. But the story isn't over there, because time went on and once Sir Humphrey took on the castle and started using the pink room as a guest room, the hauntings supposedly started up again. Sir Humphrey's guests started claiming to see flashes of blue light bursting from the wall in the middle of the night. They just used a bit of rational thinking though and just assumed like, oh, the castle's old, needs a bit of TLC, might just be an electrical fault, right? Other times they would hear scratching coming from that wall. Again, old castle, must just be animals in the walls or whatever. Apparently not a chance. Sir Humphrey's always maintained that the wall that the blue flashes were seen from is 10 feet thick. There's no wiring behind it, there can't be, and there certainly can't be any animals back there either. In a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek way, Sir Humphrey does sometimes say that they must have left a toe bone in the wall where they found the skeleton, and that's why his hauntings seem to be continuing. No one really knows who the Blue Boy was supposed to be, and we have no historical record or anything. Don't even think we've got the alleged documents that he was found with. But even so, he is one of the most famous ghost stories at the castle, and I mean, you can see why. Like, what a heartbreaking story. But there's another famous ghost said to be haunting the castle. Get your paranormal bingo cards out, because this one is the Grey Lady. But with this particular Grey Lady, we do actually have a bit of a backstory. We don't always get those. It is said that the Grey Lady is a woman called Lady Mary Berkeley, who married into the Grey family in the late 1600s, and so, because of that, came to live at Chillingham Castle. Something she may live to regret, perhaps. Her husband, Ford Grey, doesn't seem to have been a very nice man. Lots of treachery, cowardice, and political plotting to save himself. Like, all of those lovely red flags. But shady moves to further your own career, that's one thing. Ford, he was infamous for something else. After he'd married Mary and they'd had 2 daughters together, he actually ran off with Mary's own little sister, Henrietta, who was probably still a young teenager at the time. And it was Mary's mum that found out about this affair in 1682. She was getting a bit suspicious as to why Henrietta was acting so friendly towards her brother-in-law. But Ford Grey was actually arrested for the affair after Mary and Henrietta's dad, the Earl of Berkeley, sued him for conspiring to debauch his daughter. If your family holds a title of Earl, your daughters are an excellent bargaining chip then for you to strategically plan their marriages so that you can improve your own social standing. And so if word got out that one of your daughters was sullied in some way, that's not going to reflect very well on the potential marriages that you can arrange for her. After it all came out, Henrietta was sent far away to another family house, but she slipped out one night and Ford Grey was eventually released from prison after being found guilty, but they didn't decide to punish him. And the pair actually fled the country under the guise that Henrietta had actually married one of Ford's servants, but really that was all just a bit of a cover-up. But throughout all of this, the story goes that Lady Mary Berkeley was left behind at Chillingham, waiting for her husband to return to her, forever hoping that one day they could be the happy family again, until she died in 1719. One thing that the stories often leave out about Mary Berkeley though, was that she actually did remarry after Ford Grey died in 1701. She got married to a guy called Richard Ruth of Epsom. But I mean, during a time like that, it probably would have been that she would have had to remarry, either under her father's orders or in order to have some financial stability for her and her daughters, most likely. But after her death in 1719, the legend goes that Mary returned to Chillingham Castle and now continues to walk the halls waiting for that treacherous Ford Grey to return. Over the years, a lot of people have claimed to hear the rustle of a silk dress or be hit with the overpowering smell of roses, which is thought to be her. But there was one really interesting story that Lady Leonora Tankerville wrote about, all to do with the nursery. Conveniently enough, the room that had a portrait of Lady Mary Berkeley hanging in it. She said that they'd had some, quote, disturbances in there in the past anyway, but then when their friends had come to stay over, and obviously the children and their nanny would have been in the nursery, the kids and the nanny insisted that they had seen Lady Mary herself step straight out of her portrait and then follow them around. What? I don't think I would be okay with that. Seeing a ghost walk past you, unnerving, but I mean, pretty cool experience. But then for the ghost to be following you around, not even my voice can handle it. That's just something else entirely. I can just imagine her there though, creeping behind the group, just staring at them from the shadows. No thank you. But then after that, Leonora had a mate who was a psychologist come to stay at the castle, and they'd got to talking about the ghosts and specifically what had happened in the nursery with Mary's portrait. Now this intrigued the guy, and he decided that he was going to stay up for a few hours once everyone had gone to bed and watch the portrait, see if he could see the ghost for himself. According to the psychologist, nothing malefic happened though, which means like anything evil, supernatural, anything like that. And so he kind of just laughed it off and that was that. Until in the morning, as they were walking past another portrait of an older woman, the psychologist stopped in his tracks, did the whole Looney Tunes eyes popping out the head thing, and shouted that. I saw that woman last night. Turns out he had seen a ghostly woman, but it wasn't the one that he was looking out for, so didn't really make that much of a song or dance about it. Just imagine going to a place so haunted that you don't see the right ghost, you see a different one. Anyway, the Tankervilles just said to him, well, that's not the woman who said to crawl out of the portrait. But Leonora's husband got talking to his old nursemaid who still worked at the castle later that day, to which she said, oh, that portrait of the older woman, that is Lady Mary Berkeley. That portrait was just painted when she was a bit older. What? Wild, right? Sir Humphrey had added a bit of a postscript into Leonora's booklet to say say that apparently that portrait had actually left the castle when the family sold a bunch of bits off in 1933, but that he'd come across it at auction and left a massive bid on it, trying to bring it back home where it belonged. The universe, or Lady Mary, seemed to have other plans, as the bids got lost, they never got through, and the painting ended up in Australia. Just a bunch of different things went wrong. And so it was like her ghost didn't actually want to come back to Chillingham Castle. And can you really blame her? Like, being brought back to the place where your husband did you oh so dirty. But then again, there is now a painting of Lady Mary Berkeley hanging in the Grey apartment, one of the holiday apartments in the castle that you can rent out. So we're definitely not done with her just yet. But as sad as Lady Mary's story is, honestly, we are not even scratching the surface of how devastating things are gonna get. The worst is, oh, most definitely still to come. But before we get into the dungeons and things, there is one room that you have to walk through, what's known as the Old Still Room, sometimes also called the Inner Pantry. The room actually used to be the pedestrian entrance when the castle was first built, which, super convenient. Being the significant military fortress it was and all of that, if the soldiers asked you what you were doing at the castle and they didn't like your answer, you could just be literally shown to the dungeon next door. Like, no appeal, no paperwork, just nice and straightforward for them. But later on, when it was less about being the location for brute military force, but because it was still obviously so fortified, it made for an excellent spot to lock away all of the family silver. But you know, just to be on the safe side, a footman would have been tasked to sleep in the still room overnight, locked in there on his own, just in case any thieves did make their way in. And another of Chillingham's ghost stories got its start during one of these nights, around the 18th, 19th century, sometime like that, when a footman was asleep in the room after being locked in. This footman woke up in the middle of the night to find a pale, old, very frail looking woman in a white dress standing next to his bed. Before he could do anything, the woman began to quietly ask for some water. She was desperate. Being a footman in the castle, you're trained to tend to the family's every need, and that extends to guests of the family, and so this guy just assumed, oh, she must be a guest who got herself lost or didn't feel very well or anything like that. And so immediately he just jumped up to go and get the water to help this woman. As he made a start forwards though, his brain kind of caught up to him and he remembered, wait, no, hang on, how could a guest have got in here with me? I'm locked in this room. No one else should be in here until morning. He turned around, about to question this woman, to find that she was gone, completely disappeared into thin air. No sign of her, no open or unlocked doors, nothing. Just the footman and the silver. And ever since then, she's been spotted in the still room, always asking for water, but always vanishing before anyone can help her. And sometimes if you don't spot her, you might experience an intense feeling of thirst, like you might die if you don't get a glass of water right then and there, which is also thought to be her doing. See, why do you think I'm always trying to tell you to stay hydrated? Just trying to protect you. As for who she is, some reckon that she was poisoned while she was staying at the castle, and that attempts to explain the thirst. Others think that she was a victim of the plague, but no one really knows for sure. But the Lady in White, as she's now known as, there's another one for your bingo card, she isn't the only entity said to be haunting the still room. There have been reports of a shadowy woman standing by the fireplace, and then occasionally people swear that they've walked in to find a whole group of people sitting around the table, eating soup. But before you can even start wondering if you've intruded on someone's lunch break or something, you blink and suddenly it's just you standing in a very empty room again. But there is one more story I need to tell you about from the still room, and this one is less ghosty, more just straight up folklore, but you know me, I can't resist a good curse story. And it's all to do with a woman known only as the Spanish Witch. We have no proper names, no dates, no real records, only that at some point, possibly in the 1600s, a woman was accused of witchcraft and locked up in the depths of Chillingham. She was apparently executed on the castle grounds, and with her dying breath, she cursed the place. Anyone who took anything from the castle, doomed to suffer until they brought it back. Which, just to my mind, for a second, if you'll indulge me, I can't really understand why she would utter a curse like that. The castle was the place where she was imprisoned and executed. Why would she care if things were stole from it? I don't know. But anyway, over the years, people who have visited the castle ended up with unofficial souvenirs and things would go missing, until those same items would come crawling back through the post, along with letters of apology to the Spanish Witch, detailing what had happened after they took something that wasn't theirs. The best one, I've got to tell you about this, I cannot get my breath at it. A crystal doorknob. Someone had stolen a literal doorknob. I can only imagine they unscrewed the thing and took it home. But the best part of that, in their letter of apology, when they sent it back, they said they took the damn thing by mistake. Oh no, the doorknob tripped and fell into my bag. Bro, but on their way home, I shouldn't be laughing because this is not very nice, but On their way home, they got into a car accident and broke their leg, and so they thought it best to give it back, even though it was a mistake, right? Sorry, I'm being too cynical. Literally, like, you stole a doorknob from the castle. You went there, you unscrewed a doorknob from a door, and you stole it, and you said it was by mistake. In one of the letters on display, someone described what they did as trophy hunting rather than theft. Not entirely sure that one's gonna hold up in court. Oh yes, Your Honor, I was trophy hunting for PS5s. They're like Pokemons, you gotta catch them all. Anyway, the castle owners don't exactly discourage the talk of the curse, and in the still room there's this whole display of returns along with letters of apology, all being watched over by the portrait of a woman said to be the Spanish witch herself. And so with most curses, I am always inclined to lean on the side of bad things happen all the time. Is it just confirmation bias? You take something from the castle, something bad happens to you, but because you took something from the castle, you attribute it to the curse? Well, Shane from Watcher's Ghost Files decided to try it out. He's a big skeptic and he likes to try these things out, as though he took a pebble from the castle. He did kind of have permission, but more in a, sure, if you want to give it a try and see what happens. And then he said afterwards, I think it's called like their debrief or something like that, he didn't feel cursed or anything, but then he dropped the absolute bombshell that his cat, Obi, had been diagnosed with cancer. Which genuinely, that is just heartbreaking. As of around the start of June 2025 though, Obi was still doing good, but yeah, poor little guy. So whether you believe in the curse or not, you are free to take things at your own risk. But now, we are heading into the dungeons. Naturally, one of the darkest spots in Chillingham where a lot of prisoners died. Apparently there was a story from back in the 1800s when workers cracked open a sealed off part of the dungeons to find the remains of a man still sitting in the chair that he died in. But the second the seal was broken and fresh air hit, he just crumbled into dust. And if you go into the dungeons and you look closely at the walls now, you can see that they are scarred with old initials and little tally marks as prisoners counted the days that they've been trapped inside and things. And you might also spot the initials FC scratched into a part of the stone. And it said that these are the initials of a man called Fabian, who may now haunt the area. It said that he was a Polish stable hand who got blamed for letting the royal horses escape one day. But because English wasn't his native language, he wasn't able to defend himself and declare his innocence. He knew he didn't do it, but he just couldn't tell the people that were accusing him. He was thrown into the dungeon along with another guy called Martin, who was supposedly the real culprit. But now people swear that they can hear two men arguing in the darkness inside the dungeon when there's not a living soul about. But it's not just prisoners hanging around here. There was one story of a tour group who were directed into the dungeons with the tour guide following behind them. All of a sudden, all the tour guide could hear from inside was screaming, people shouting out. Apparently, according to the group, what had happened was a ghostly dog had been seen darting in from behind the tour guide, and the whole group had seen it, other than the guide himself. But I mean, back in the day, dogs would have been around this area. They would have been let loose to clean up the blood and other nastiness once the prisoners had been killed. So yeah, that's a detail you can't unknow. But considering how relatively small the dungeons are, it's not a huge space. There has been a lot of activity witnessed in this area. Lanterns get blown out, stones are thrown by unseen hands, and the air will turn icy cold out of nowhere, not a draft or anything like that. Some prisoners have even left the dungeons with scratches or bite marks on their skin. No idea where they came from. They do say that the ghost of a soldier was imprisoned, tortured, and left to rot here. Don't think the ghost was, his body was, and then he became a ghost. But it's said that he is to blame for the attacks, as, funnily enough, he's not big on visitors in his space. The dungeon does also feature an oubliette, possibly one of the worst ways that I can think of to go. I say that now, we haven't even got to the torture chamber to be fair. But in case you didn't know, the name oubliette comes from the French word oublier, meaning forgotten, because prisoners would be thrown down this deep, narrow hole and literally just forgotten about. You'd most likely break your arms and legs on the way down, and if you were really lucky, you'd break your neck and be done with it, but if not, you were in for an agonisingly slow death. Apparently when they first uncovered the oubliette back in the Victorian times, they spotted the bones of two skeletons still down there. Nowadays there's plastic bones placed there for effect, but some guests claim that if you look long enough into that pit, you might catch a glimpse of a pale young girl staring right back up at you. That one gave me goosebumps to think about. Imagine staring down into into the oubliette, knowing what it was used for, and you see someone staring back up at you. Nuh-uh. Nope. But even that does not come close to this next guy, because if Chillingham Castle has a true villain, it's John Sage. Sometimes better known by the nicknames Dragfoot, or, if you're feeling dramatic, the Butcher of the Scots, but that's with good reason. According to the story, he was a soldier in King Edward I's army and relished in battle against the Scots. Absolutely loved it, but he was injured when he took a spear to the leg, which doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well as taking an arrow to the knee. Anyway, because of his injury, he couldn't fight anymore, but he wasn't done. He wanted to do what he could against Scotland, and so the next best career move for him was castle torturer. He was said to have run the dungeons for 3 years, and if even half the legends are true, his cruelty towards the Scottish prisoners bordered on performance art. He supposedly orchestrated some of the worst suffering Chillingham ever saw, torturing and killing thousands of people during his reign of terror. So much so that the floor in the torture chamber, the real one under the tea rooms, was said to be sloped to let the blood drain away. He had instruments at his disposal like the rack, which would be used to dislocate all of your joints, or the wheel, which would break all of your bones, and the iron chair, designed to make sitting down the worst thing that you can imagine. There is also a so-called Iron Maiden on display in the torture chamber, and while it looks the part, there is actually no evidence that this was ever a real torture device from the medieval period anyway. It first appeared in stories from the 19th century onwards, so that one's doubtful. That's just a bit of general torture knowledge for you, not just related to Chillingham Castle. You're welcome. But that wasn't all that John Sage was said to have used. He apparently got creative too, using a barrel that was lined on the inside with nails. Roll the barrel down the hill with the prisoner inside, and yeah, you can imagine how that went. I told you, not nice today. But there was also a bed of nails with a fire lit underneath. You've got impalement, boiling, slow starvation. You can see why people called Chillingham a death machine. But the worst part about John Sage's legend, if you can even categorise between not worse and worse, one of the most brutal things that he is said to have done came towards the end of his time at the castle. There was becoming less and less of a need for torture. The English already had all of the information they needed, but the castle was still packed with prisoners, men, women and children. So instead of letting them go, he took care of them. He rounded up the adults and the older children, herded them into the courtyard and set the place alight. The children were kept in King Edward I's room with the best view of the courtyard, and they were forced to watch what happened to their parents and their siblings. When it was over, the legend says that Sage didn't stop there. Not wanting those children to then grow up and seek revenge on him, he ensured that none of them left that room alive. If that is not enough to haunt a place forever, I don't know what is. But he was about to get what was coming to him. The story goes that John Sage was seeing the daughter of a local border reaver, basically a lawless raider from the Anglo-Scottish border. Sage and his sweetheart had been getting a little bit into their activities on the rack, and he allegedly strangled her to death. Her father was naturally outraged, and so he rallied a mob, which broke into the castle and dragged John out into the courtyard. He was hanged in a makeshift gallows, but before he could die, people cut parts off of him as souvenirs. A fitting end to the guy, really, but after his death, it is said that John Sage never left the castle. Tour guides claim that John Sage is one of Chillingham's most aggressive entities, with people catching sight of a tall, thick-set, bearded man walking with a limp as he drags his injured leg through the dungeon, the torture chamber, or even out into the courtyard. Sometimes he'll just loom right in front of you, towering over you while staring down, which, alright, intimidating much. Others say that they can just feel this heavy, malevolent presence, that dreadful feeling of someone breathing down your neck, or you'll hear his shuffling, uneven footsteps. What is interesting about the story of John Sage, though, is that you won't find his name in Lady Leonora's Book of Ghost Stories from the 1920s. And I feel like if he was as prevalent back then as he is now, he would be one of the heavy hitters in her writing. So is he a new ghost story come about in the last 100 years? And if so, why? And we can take that a bit further as well, because for all of the details of the atrocities that he supposedly committed, all of the deaths that he was responsible for, all of the misery and the torture, there's no record of a John Sage ever existing. No mention of him in Edward I's army records or anything. So that is something to keep in mind. But whether he was real or he was just a product of the castle's folklore, it doesn't get away from the fact that real brutality happened here. It's on record. And so maybe that energy has just seeped into every part of the castle, as the torture chamber is said to be an extremely haunted spot, regardless of the fact that it isn't the actual chamber. It's just where the devices are now displayed. displayed. People have reported seeing shadowy figures drifting about the room, totally silently, but then just watching from the corners. Other times, the old devices move on their own, creaking or rattling, and some visitors swear that they've heard the unmistakable sounds of joints popping, just like the rack would have been responsible for back in the day. Lovely. But it's not just shadows seen here either. There have been sightings of a girl, dressed head to toe in white, right down to white gloves and a parasol, and she'll just be walking through the area, oblivious to all of the instruments of misery around her. And so that really does seem like she's possibly an echo from a time before this area was the torture chamber exhibit, and she has nothing to do with any of that. But then there's Peter, the poltergeist, who's apparently known to have a pretty bad attitude. The story with him goes that he was a manservant for one of the Grey family, but he was thoroughly miserable in life and just kept that energy going in death. He apparently doesn't like women down in the torture chamber, but then also he doesn't like men. He just has a problem with people, full stop. He really likes to make people feel uncomfortable by scratching the back of your neck or gently running a finger down your face or pulling your hair. Or if you're a guy, it gets even worse. You'll get slapped on the shoulder or someone unseen will grab your wrist. So yeah, that's something to look forward to if you ever go and visit. And so you'd expect the room that is set up like a torture chamber would really set the mood for the worst ghost stories, but it gets even darker in the King Edward I room, which, yeah, sounds fancy, being named after the king himself stayed here on his way further north. But now we already know that it is the room where supposedly John Sage killed all the children. And just walking into this room, the atmosphere is said to feel super heavy. You know when you just walk into a room of people and they've just been arguing and you can feel that energy? It's like that, but so much worse. It can be enough to make you inexplicably furious or on the verge of tears for absolutely no reason. Sometimes it can feel like you've walked into this room and you just need to walk straight back out. The walls are going to close in on you otherwise. But then also, some visitors claim to feel like something unseen is pressing down on their shoulders, forcing them to the floor. And it's not just visitors on ghost tours that get these feelings either. They happen to staff members too, who are just trying to go about their day in peace. There was a cleaner who was working away in there one morning when suddenly she just got that feeling like she wasn't alone. She switched off her Henry the Hoover and the silence, it was deafening. But every fibre of her being was just screaming at her to get out, to escape, to never come back. Against all of that instinctual advice though, she started to look around her. Can't be that bad, right? It's the morning. Okay, I'm far away from everybody else in the castle, but come on, can't be that scary in the cold light of day. And for a second, it wasn't. She carried on looking around, couldn't see a thing out of place, but something could clearly see her. From the balcony above her, she heard this dark, guttural growl that barked 4 or 5 words at her. She didn't understand what it said, but I don't think you need the words to understand the intent behind them. She left everything where it was and ran out of the castle, calling the office later that day to tell them that she would not be returning to her place of employment. Completely fair. But it's not always just a feeling or a very scary voice in here. Objects have been moved, doors will slam shut even when the room's empty, and there was one time a bench actually flipped over, but there was no one near it. An inexplicable mist has also been seen, which was super weird because there aren't any candles, there's no smoke, obviously no one is allowed to light a cigarette inside or anything like that, but yet this mist was just lingering in the air. Sometimes that unmistakable metallic smell of blood is experienced in the King Edward I room, which, I don't know, if the massacre really did happen, that's dark. The shadowy figures of soldiers walking along the balcony have also been seen in here. But if you're in the courtyard of the castle and you look up into the windows of the King Edward I room, you might see child-sized shadows watching you from above. Some naturally come to the conclusion that they must be the children from the Sage story, but others reckon it's just more ghosts added to the pile over the centuries. Either way, if you're thinking of playing hide and seek in here after dark, don't, because you're gonna lose. But moving on, and we have already mentioned the tea room being the place that hides the entrance to the real torture chamber, but it is still a bit of a legend in its own right. This place has seen a lot of use, from being the castle kitchens to then becoming the minstrels hall, where diners would eat, drink and be merry while musicians played from the gallery above them. And now it's the place where you can grab a tea and hope that the ghosts leave you in peace long enough for you to enjoy your slice of cake. Don't count on it though, not if these stories are anything to go by. Plenty of people have spotted shadows flickering about on that gallery before vanishing. And then there's also been a man in an Edwardian shirt and black riding boots spotted, just staring. One unlucky visitor got a right glare from him before he just turned and glided up the stairs towards the chapel. Naturally, the visitor thought it would be an excellent idea to follow him, only to find nothing but empty air and a very strong sense that they shouldn't be here. 2 staff members, tour guide Mark and resident resident paranormal investigator Richard Craig, they had a very weird encounter in here in the tea rooms. They were just sat down at one of the tables when they heard an almighty clattering coming from above them on that gallery. They went to go check it out and found that a wooden doorknob all of a sudden had just launched itself out of place. Okay, very odd that. What is it with doorknobs at Chillingham Castle not wanting to stay indoors? Anyway, they kind of conferred amongst themselves and couldn't think of an explanation when they both turned to look behind them back towards the tea rooms, and they saw that the chandeliers were swinging as if someone or something had just made a super dramatic exit. After that, they carried on towards the chapel again when a disembodied voice told them in no uncertain terms to get out. I think they listened to the scary guttural demon voice and took their leave at that point. But in the tea rooms, people have seen faces peering in through the windows. Some diners have felt someone sit next to them only to turn and realise that there's absolutely no one there. Not sharing my cake with no one, dead or alive, thanks. Mediums have picked up on the presence of a woman, a cook, called Judith in this area too. Maybe she's responsible for some of what's been reported in here. They say that she's still dressed in her cook's uniform and she's usually sat by the original fireplace, quietly making sure that no one ruins her kitchen. But now if we leave the tea rooms and head up into the chapel, as I'm sure you can imagine from those past couple of stories, there is plenty for me to tell you about in here too. It's obviously designed to be a place of peace, but people say that if you sit in here for long enough, you'll start to notice something strange. The muffled sound of two men deep in conversation. Although you can never really make out quite what they're saying, you just hear that low buzz that instantly dies if you try and figure out where it came from. Unlike the arguing voices in the dungeons, we don't really know who these are, whether they're soldiers swapping secrets or clergymen whispering about what someone said at confession or something. But if you do come across this story in your own research, you might hear that these conversations are taking place in the library. The reason for that is because back in the Victorian times, the chapel was being used as the library. The more you know. But it seems like this space still has its own secrets anyway. During restoration, workers pulled up the floor and found 3 skeletons buried underneath, including 2 men. So were they the voices heard muttering between themselves? But then also the skeleton of a little girl. No one knows for sure who she was or what happened to her to wind up buried within the castle, but people swear that she's still around, having seen a small girl wearing a dirty white dress. Mediums say that her name was Eleanor and that maybe she was a child prisoner during the border wars. This couldn't have been during the time of John Sage because apparently once her captors had done with her, they turfed her out and left her to fend for herself. I don't know if you know this, but a dirty white dress probably isn't going to be enough to keep you warm against a cold, harsh night, especially in the north of England. And so the story goes that she crept back into the castle and huddled herself into the chapel, but died right there. Whether they just decided to bury her where she lay, I don't really know. Now, the ghost of Eleanor makes herself known mostly to women, but she'll play with your hair or tug at your sleeves, or if you sit in her spot, you might just get overwhelmed with this wave of sadness. Some also say that they feel the weight of a small child sit in their lap when they're on their own, or feel a cold hand slip into theirs. During this heat wave right now, I feel like there would be nothing better than having a ghost child put their cold hand in yours. When she manifests though, she's described as being very small with matted hair, and she'll appear and give people a desperate pleading look just before vanishing. And so now, apparently a few visitors have taken to leaving a soft toy on the pew just for her. What I find really interesting about the stories in the chapel though, is that during his interview with Most Haunted in 2002, Sir Humphrey was saying that there weren't any known hauntings in this area of the castle. But then by 2008, and most notably when Richard Felix went and did a little documentary there, the staff running the ghost tours were calling the chapel the most active part of the castle. So, like with everything, make of that what you will. The Great Hall is another show-stopping room in Chillingham Castle, but it's not just the photo ops in here. Although, hello, elephant armour, very cool. More than a few staff members have found themselves having to dodge flying cups and plates while locking up though. No explanation why they're being launched off the table. Very creepily, chairs have been known to slide themselves across the floor while no one's sitting in them. No one is even anywhere near them. You'll just hear the unmistakable sound of the wooden chair scraping on the stone floor. And then the shadowy figure of a man has been seen pacing back and forth along the far wall. A little less unnerving, although would probably still put me on edge, are the claims that a party can be heard in the Great Hall, even when the room is completely empty and should be silent. Everything from glasses clinking together, laughter, just voices, just all those sounds of a party, all echoing from the place. But then you step in and find it deserted, not a soul about. And sometimes it's not all just background noises either. There was one woman sitting alone in the Great Hall one night when she heard another woman walk up behind her, where she then proceeded to complain about how exhausted she was and that she was going to bed. The woman who was sat down turned around to look and see who this person was, but there wasn't anyone there. Either she was really quick to get herself to bed, or maybe that was one of the roster of ghosts here. But if all of this sounds right up your alley and exactly the kind of thing that you want to spend your time doing, you are in luck. Like I said before, Chillingham Castle does have holiday apartments that you can rent out, and if you pair it with an overnight ghost hunt, you're laughing or screaming, depending on how it goes on the investigation. But even once you're done ghost hunting around the castle and you're ready to retire to your bed, if you've chosen the wrong, or I guess the right apartment, depends how you feel about it, you could be in for a terrible night's sleep. Lots of people have reported trying to get some sleep in the grey apartment, but being kept awake by footsteps overhead. Like their upstairs neighbours are just running laps at 3 in the morning. Except there shouldn't be anyone up there at all. And the grey apartment is probably the most infamous one too, owing, I'm gonna guess, to the fact that the Grey Lady, Lady Mary Barclay's portrait, is still hanging in there. She's supposedly been seen walking the length of the apartment too. But also, what's interesting to know is that this apartment shares a wall with the Pink Room, the place where the remains of the Blue Boy were found. So, you know, sweet dreams. But the Lookout apartment is also worth the mention, as there's supposedly the presence known as the Nanny. And so, I'll just paint the scene for you. If you decide to take the family for a stay at Chillingham Castle and you finally get your kids settled into bed, it's apparently not unusual for them to wake up at weird hours during the night, with them sounding like they're running riot in the next room. And you'll go in thinking you're about to break up an argument over who's got the best bed or something, but instead you'll find the kids wide awake, insisting that 2 or 3 other children had crept into their room, giggling, calling out their names, before starting to play and tickle the kids' feet in bed. I think it wouldn't matter how old I was, I would never have been okay with that at any age. But the odd part is, obviously, you as parents know that there are no other kids in the apartment, you can't see anything in the room right now, and so you just chalk it up to excitement. You take the kids into the kitchen though, go grab them a glass of water or milk or something, calm them down, ready to go to bed, just restore a bit of order. But when you all go back into the kids' bedroom, all the bedding is suddenly perfectly neat and smooth, like someone else has come into the apartment and made the beds with this military precision. Apparently, that's the nanny following behind the ghostly children, keeping an eye on both the living and the dead. Oh, thank you, but no thank you. Tiny handprints have also been known to appear out of nowhere on the windows, even when there are no kids around or no kids staying in the apartment with you. The sound of children's laughter and running feet also echo all around the apartments, and no one knows specifically who these kids are or who the nanny is, but they've been spotted on more than one occasion. But now that we've covered a lot of these named ghosties with, in some cases, a bit of a backstory, there are so many more of these entities that we don't really know a huge amount about. Like when you hear the distant sounds of bagpipes, that's thought to be the Phantom Piper wandering the halls of the castle. And then there's a woman called Sixpence Sally, who was the castle's Lady of the Night, and she now apparently likes to follow visitors around. I also came across stories of a little boy called Timothy, who, according to Richard Craig, the castle's paranormal investigator, he's said to be thoroughly evil and makes his presence known on ghost hunts. And Timothy, he's supposedly got company in the form of none other than Aleister Crowley. Yep, that Crowley, the infamous occultist. Apparently, he was invited to the castle in the 1920s by the Earl of Tankerville and may or may not have carried out a ritual in the tea rooms. No proof from what I can see, but that's just how the story goes. But with Timothy, it seems to very much depend on what mood he's in as to what responses you get through the spirit box on an investigation. He starts out as Timothy, apparently not very nice, but okay. Then he devolves into Timmy, getting nastier now, but once he's in full flow, it's Tim, the one that likes to take particular delight in letting loose a torrent of profanities. So yeah, not the spirit to make contact with if you're hoping for a gentle chat with the other side. But then even if you don't encounter a specific entity, there are seemingly plenty more possible paranormal reminders of the castle's dark past. Visitors will sometimes report the inexplicable sounds of battle, of metal clashing on metal, of men shouting and screams of pain, potentially being echoes from when the castle was besieged. But then other times, people will claim to hear disembodied sounds in the courtyard, of horses' hooves, of dogs barking, of droves of people milling about and seemingly preparing for battle, even when that person is totally alone in the enclosed space. But then, if it all gets too much within the castle walls, I'm sorry, but you can't escape from the dark and bloody history of Chillingham by taking a walk in the grounds. There used to be 3 massive yew trees, and they were called the Hanging Trees. I think you can tell where this is going already. 2 of them have fallen down now. They are still alive, but they're just not standing upright anymore. But these trees particularly were said to be where prisoners, particularly obviously Scots, would be left hanging until until they died a slow, painful death. And when I say hanging, I don't mean by the neck. That would have been too quick. Prisoners would have been tied up by their waists, or hung upside down by their feet, or have their hands behind their back and tied up by their wrists, which makes my shoulders ache just thinking about. Once the prisoner had died, their body would just be left there to rot, with the bones falling wherever they fell, and that was that. Just honestly, Chillingham, you need to chill. But now, around these trees, disembodied voices have been heard, and shadows seen darting in and out of the tree line. Some people have claimed to see the silhouette of bodies still hanging from the yew tree left standing, which is just an image and a half. What really gets under people's skin, though, is that unmistakable feeling of eyes on you, as if someone unseen is watching you. But apparently, it's not just the echoes of the condemned that have been seen around the castle grounds. Well, I mean, they became the condemned, but they didn't start out that way, because this area is also home to the apparitions of hooded monks. I'm pretty sure if you haven't already called paranormal bingo by now during this Chillingham episode, there's something wrong with your bingo card. But it's not all just because the castle has every paranormal trope lumped in together. There is seemingly a good reason behind them being spotted here. Some say monks from a nearby monastery, possibly Alnwick Abbey, as that wasn't super far away. They used to slip over to Chillingham after dark. Not to get involved in the politics or try to save anybody's life if they were in prison there or anything like that, but to simply cut down the bodies left hanging in the trees so they could give the Scottish prisoners a decent burial, rather than just leaving them to rot. But that went completely against what the people running the show at Chillingham wanted, and so if they caught the monks doing this, trying to show any sort of compassion, they would also string the monks up in the trees. So the story goes. But one thing I did wonder about seeing the monks is that, yeah, if that did happen, that would definitely be enough to keep some lost souls wandering around here. But could these monks actually date back to a time pre-Chillingham Castle, when the site was used as a monastery? I don't know, I didn't see it anywhere, but that was just my line of thinking. But even aside from the ghostly monks and the executed prisoners, the castle grounds still aren't exactly quiet. There's another lady in white seen around here, and she wanders through the trees from where the old kitchen garden used to be. She's always carrying a basket as if she's just gone picking herbs or whatnot, and she appears to be a regular, although regular in the context of a paranormal sighting. She's seen both during the day and the night, and I don't think we know too much more about her. But if you end up walking on the main driveway up to the castle, you might not be feeling so carefree as the ghostly woman collecting ingredients from the gardens. Because this particular approach is known as the Devil's Walk. And I know it's one of those names that conjures up images of cloven hooves and scary shadow figures already, but in folklore, things named after the devil probably had something to do with executions or just generally a dark time in history, so that tracks. But even so, the Devil's Walk is said to very much have an atmosphere, with people hearing footsteps following behind them when they're alone, or even feeling someone tap you on the shoulder. But other people say that the name the Devil's Walk comes from the legend that a black coach drawn by headless horses has been seen tearing down the drive, either collecting the souls of Chillingham's dead, or, depending on who's telling the story, ferrying the devil himself to the front door of the killing machine. But just when you thought you'd made it out of the woods, literally, there's one more spot on the grounds of the castle that need a mention: the lake. And I mean, it looks lovely, very nature reservey, but obviously if you've gathered anything from what we've chatted about to do with Chillingham, it does supposedly come with a dark backstory. The legend goes that after one of the castle's particularly bloody massacres, hundreds of bodies were supposedly dumped right into this lake. And over the centuries, all of those bones have just built up at the bottom, making for the least inviting swimming spot you have ever seen. Not that it's put people off. I saw blog posts of people that had gone wild swimming in here and things. Something touches my foot in a lake that I can't see. Ugh. I think this did evolve into the cautionary tale for kids in that don't go near that lake, or the spirits of the prisoners will grab you and pull you under. And so that's why the ghostly faces of the dead have been seen staring up at you from the black waters of the lake. But also, strange blue lights and ghostly mists have been seen rolling over the lake at night. And I don't know if that mist is any different to usual mists that you'll find around bodies of water in the UK, but there you go. Realistically though, there's not much evidence that any bodies were dumped here en masse. And just the way that I'm thinking about it, surely the lake would have been a water source for the castle, so they wouldn't go polluting it by chucking a bunch bunch of corpses in there? Surely, right? Still, I could be very wrong, and every now and then some fishermen do end up hooking bones on their lines. Usually just animal bones, but with a backstory like that, everything helps to keep the legend alive, I suppose. And so after everything that we've just covered, the centuries of bloodshed, of misery, of hauntings and curses, you'd think that Chillingham wouldn't have anything left that isn't touched by tragedy in some form or another, right? So I've got a little bit of a palate cleanser for you. Let's talk about something that's actually still alive and kicking around the place. Because the castle's parkland is actually home to something just as legendary as the castle itself, the wild white cattle. And these beasts have been roaming the place since the 1200s, possibly even longer, and are about as feral as you can get in this country. Back in the medieval days, people used to hunt them for sport and use them for food, but these days they're pretty much left to just do their own thing. No one handles them, you can't go cuddle a cow or anything like that. They are just free to get on with their life, but they are protected and they're watched over by an organisation that helps with conservation and whatnot. But there is an old belief that if the wild cattle ever die out, the castle will collapse into ruin and all the darkness and malevolent paranormal energy will be set loose onto the world. Sort of following those same veins as the Tower of London and their ravens, if you're into those sorts of legends and things. And perhaps it's not the doing of the Chillingham Wild Cattle Association, but it's actually because they're looked after by fairies. Oh yes! It's said that if anyone tries to hurt the cattle, the fairies will intervene, like what apparently happened in 1967 when a young boy started chasing them. He claimed that unseen hands grabbed his legs and he fell and broke his ankle. Coincidence? Or the doing of yet another paranormal legend at Chillingham? Who knows? But luckily, the cattle are still very much alive and thriving, so the world is, for now, safe from the likes of John Sage as he stays confined to the castle. Although whether you'd like to spend the night in a place where he's said to be skulking around, that is another question entirely. Because at Chillingham Castle, every stone here has soaked up centuries of suffering. Every room has supposedly seen things that most of us would rather not imagine. And maybe that's why it feels so crowded, even when you're all alone. Whether you do feel brave enough to last the night here, or you end up legging it at 3 AM, heart pounding and convinced you've just seen a ghost, that's the real question, isn't it? So, would you survive England's most haunted castle, or just become another story relayed to the next ghost tour group? Also, whatever you do, please don't steal a crystal doorknob. And so that, my friends, is Chillingham Castle. Bet you weren't expecting me to go on for that long, were you? Not the brightest idea to do that with a voice at probably about 70% after Download Festival last weekend. But now it is your turn. I want to hear from you. Would you actually stay here, or is it a hard no? Admittedly, if you do want to stay and you fancy yourself in the grey apartment, that's the most popular, I had a cheeky look before recording this and there are a few dates here and there in the next few months. But if you want to stay over Halloween, for example, forget it. Halloween 2026, already booked for that particular apartment too, so that's just something to bear in mind. I first became obsessed with Chillingham Castle when I watched a vlog from my favourite booktuber, pretty much the only booktuber I watch anymore, Gavin Reads It All, where he stayed alone in the grey apartment. So if you like books and haunted things, go give him a watch. He has spent a night alone reading in 30 East Drive, so I have endless respect for him. I don't think I could ever do that. And if you want even more Chillingham, my wonderful friend Dead Cold Tales has also done some absolutely fantastic videos on the place, so please also do check him out. And so it was only a matter of time really before I covered the place on my channel. I was just building up to it really because I knew it was going to be a massive beast of a story. And it has been. It's definitely been. With all that said though, based on everything that I've read and researched in the last almost 2 weeks, I do think that it is sensible to take at least some of these ghosts with a pinch of salt. Like Eleanor in the Chapel wasn't a story back in 2002 when Most Haunted filmed there. Now she is, and the chapel is a hotspot for paranormal activity. But then also the big one, John Sage. There's no record of a John Sage at Chillingham Castle, so how did we get that name? Where did he come from? How do we know the atrocities and the story behind his death? If he was a torturer from the medieval times, why wasn't his ghost showing up in the 1920s when Lady Leonora wrote her book on the ghosts? So I can't help but wonder if he's just become this personification of all the darkness that has happened here. Maybe all that dark energy, that suffering, that death just needed a face, and so people made one up? Because if he was real, why did we only start hearing his name long after the fact and still can't come across a record of someone so significant in the castle's history? But all of that aside, anyway, it is obviously worth pointing out that there is no getting away from the fact that Chillingham Castle does make a fair bit of money off the whole Most Haunted Castle thing. Ghost hunts, ghost tours, overnight stays, people coming to film here, people like me talking about them, like you get the idea. So it does make financial sense to lean into the stories that get people coming back for more and discovering this castle for the first time. Like, for example, Timothy. From what I could see, the evidence of this supposedly extremely negative entity is a few swear words through the spirit box and an unproven connection to Aleister Crowley. So yeah, like, some of these I'm not 100% convinced. But same goes for entities like Sixpence Sally, Peter the Poltergeist. I just wish there was more to go on, something that you could actually check against some historical record. With a place this old, it just sometimes isn't possible. Still, like I say every time I bring that point up, I'm not knocking the whole paranormal as an income stream. I am all for it. It keeps people visiting and spending money at these places. And even if it is only because of the ghost stories, well, that's still just a good thing to help with maintaining buildings that are so significant to our history. But I do feel like it is a healthy thing to do to hold on to that pinch of salt. Still, with everything that's gone on at Chillingham, the centuries of violence, the suffering, and then the sheer volume of people swearing blind that they've seen or heard something absolutely terrifying, I definitely believe that Chillingham Castle is haunted. Whether it's ghosts, energy, or even just the weight of the history that happened here, I don't really know. Whether there are 50 to 100 ghosts haunting the place like some claim, seems like a bit of a reach, but what do I know? So do let me know if you disagree with me, if you agree with me. Have you had your own paranormal experience here too? Please tell me everything. And with all of that said, for all of the ghost stories and the haunted legends, it's easy to forget that at the centre of Chillingham Castle are real people. Even though it was centuries ago, a lot of people suffered and died here. Even if we don't always know exactly what happened or to whom or by whom, we do know that real lives were destroyed behind those walls. However much we love a creepy story with a macabre history, these people deserve to still be remembered. And so leaving you on that note, if you enjoyed the video, please do let me know by giving it a little like. And if you want to support me and you're not already, hitting subscribe would be a very cool thing for you to do. But anyway, that is all from me today. Go get a drink of water. I need you to stay hydrated. Preferably not out of a black lake that may or may not contain bodies either. I cannot wait to chat with you more about the morbid, mysterious and macabre. So until next time, sleep safe. Holy cow, that's over 2 hours. That is over 2 hours of yapping about ghosts. Was today a very sensible day to record an over 2 hour video about ghosts in what is quite possibly the hottest room in the house? But I'm really hoping that you can't hear the buzz of the fan that is on right now, because I would have melted on the floor if I didn't have that. I have a little handheldy thing, and I also pulled out all the stops. I have an ice bath under the desk, so my feeties are lovely and cold. It's just the rest of me that is burning.